This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Welcome to Killer Innovations. We are here at CES, taking a look at all the latest technologies and innovations that have been announced. I've got a longtime friend, Bob O'Donnell, longtime friend.
We got a story to tell.
Yeah, we got a story to tell. We'll get to that. But Bob is one of the leading trend and analysts out of Silicon Valley. Been there for quite some time. Was a key resource at HP in providing insights and directions for technologies that we would include in our products like our laptops, etc. Bob and I have been friends long before that even. But I wanted to grab some time with you here at CES. You've been on the floor now, been here for a couple of days. I've been around the floor for a couple of days. So this is an opportunity for us to kind of either agree or disagree on what we're really seeing here at the CES.
Well, and look, we've all heard about the big trends, right? And we were chatting a little bit before we started the show. AI everywhere, right? AI in everything. Smart stuff everywhere, powered by AI. Autonomous cars. Right before I came over here, was walking around North Hall. I mean, it feels like you're at an auto show.
Yeah, doesn't it? It's amazing.
It is amazing.
It's amazing how big speakers they can make and cram them into a car.
That's very true,
isn't it?
But yeah, no, it's amazing. And it was interesting because a lot of the cars they're almost more like a pod, like they were transportation pods. Most of those were the concept ones, but. So that was fascinating to see, and we can dig into the whole autonomous car thing and timelines, and because one of the things around that front is we were talking about things that are overhyped. Autonomous cars I think are being overhyped too, because it's not that they're incredibly important; they are, and they're going to be amazing transformational, societal transformation things. But the timeline when you and I can actually buy a fully autonomous car is way further out than I think people are willing to acknowledge. And that's a big problem because it's all about expectations in this business, right? If you tell people, man, and you give the impression that they're going to have it right away, and then you actually can't get it for a long time, and the way you do get it is not directly, but indirectly through some kind of a service. It's all good, and it's all interesting, and the tech industry is going crazy about it because it's a massive market. But at the same time, I think there's been this confusion, and all of a sudden we're starting to see people go, yeah, I think before you and I can buy a fully autonomous car, we're talking 2025 in a lot of cases. Some people are saying 21, 22. Look, most people can't think beyond, 6 months from now.
Right.
So making those kind of promises, I think, is a bit of a challenge. But nevertheless, I don't want to be too negative because there is some great stuff. In fact, I was just chatting with the folks at NVIDIA, and they really focused, it was interesting at their press conference, on this notion of functional safety, which in the automotive business is a huge deal. But outside of automotive, it's not necessarily well known. It's basically redundancy, right? And all the work you have to do. And NVIDIA, as they've evolved their platform, they're really digging into that piece of it. And I think that's interesting because it reflects the sophistication of how they're developing their platform and what they're doing. And it also reflects how complicated and intensely hard some of this stuff is.
Yeah, I think people way underestimate. They think if I can envision it, why does it take more than 6 months or a year?
Exactly. Well,
it's the old joke about, products would be great if someone could figure out how to do a PowerPoint compiler. If I showed it on a PowerPoint, I should be able to hit one button and magically have this app that just does all these amazing things.
Exactly. Well, and it's like, back when you were at HP and when I talked to NVIDIA, I'm like, when a new GPU comes out, 2 months later, it's in a PC that I can buy.
Yeah.
And that's a very, and then, the other problem you have in automotive is that, the supply chain, it's years, like even tech that's coming out today, we're not going to see in, production cars for 3 years roughly. Is the kind of time frame. So anyway.
Well, I have a great story on that. In Bentley, they put a Bluetooth module into a new Bentley that was only $280,000 for this Bentley. It was a low-cost Bentley. And the CTO for Bentley called me up because he couldn't get any phone devices to synchronize with this Bluetooth. And they brought it to HP. We parked it in the parking lot. We tore into it. They picked the Bluetooth module 4 years before and had never upgraded the Bluetooth module. It was a Bluetooth 1.0, if you remember back to those days.
Yeah.
So you're buying a $280,000 car and not a single phone would synchronize with the Bentley because of the long lead times, right?
Yeah.
And even, look, Elon with Tesla cars, right? He made all these promises, and it's not this year, maybe next year, maybe next year.
Well, exactly. And unfortunately, he's one of the key perpetrators of driving this kind of, I think, unrealistic view. And again, it's going to be great. There's a lot of the benefits they talk about for autonomous cars of safety and everything else, you can put that in what I would call assisted cars, right? That where it's the ADAS systems where, automatically braking if something, a person or an object comes out in front of you, right? That's incredibly valuable.
Well, and I have that in my Explorer. My 2018 Explorer has it. It's got the lane guides. If I don't use my turn signal and I try to change lanes, it fights you to say, no, idiot, stay in the lane you're in, type of thing.
Yeah.
And I actually love it. My wife hates it.
Right.
But I love it. But I think you're right. I think it's this progression.
Yes.
It's not going to be all of a sudden you're going to wake up one morning and completely switch over. It is these migrations, right? And the same thing whether it's, magically we're going to have 5G wireless and everybody's going to have it in the world, and everybody's going to have multi-gigabit speeds, and we're going to have 1 millisecond latency. And it's not going to happen that way.
No.
It never happens that way. It is this migration and integration of these technologies into people's lives.
Right, absolutely. And, another big theme, of course, from CES is smart home and connected things. And, obviously, there's Google's got a huge presence here for the first time. There's a ton of people, of course, integrating Alexa. But one of the interesting challenges, and so bottom line is voice-based computing, voice UIs are a huge, interesting trend here at the show because but there's been a lot of confusion as well on that front. You have to tear apart, just because it has a voice UI doesn't necessarily mean it's a voice assistant, right? Those are they're related, but they're fundamentally different. Like if I have some gadget that I just want it to tell it to do something, that's a voice UI. It's then when you expect it to do additional things and think ahead and use AI to, look at my calendar and then automatically schedule a plane flight and then know when the meetings are going to be and pre-schedule an Uber to pick me up and blah, blah, blah. That's more of the assistant realm, but we're in this kind of a weird space in between voice UI and voice assistant. And the other big problem, and I know Amazon is trying to address this, they have this thing called ESP, but this is the scenario I've already seen and it's going to get way worse on the smart home front. You're going to buy a device that has Alexa integrated. You're going to buy another device that might have Google Assistant integrated, and you're going to start saying things, and you're going to have simultaneous reactions from all these, smart speakers, and it's going to be like, oh my God, this is a disaster.
Yep. Well, this is interesting because we're here in the mobile studio. Google is right next to us here, and they've declared war at this CES on voice control, on the voice that you're calling voice UI type of a thing. And I've asked a couple of other of Tim Bajarin was here. He interviewed here on Tuesday. He was here in the studio, and I asked him about this about is there a consolidation coming? In the general, at least my general consensus is this battle's going to go on for a little while. Nobody's going to give up any turn. Whether it's look, Samsung's got Bixby. I don't know who uses Bixby. Right. You got Microsoft with Cortana. You've got Amazon. You've got Siri from Apple. You've got Google.
Well, look, it's the new OS war, right? This is the new OS war because the traditional OS wars are over, and everybody won and nobody won at the same time.
Yeah.
So this is the new OS war. And so that's why this is so incredibly important. And even Bixby, and look, they certainly have a lot of challenges, but what Samsung has at least recognized is they want to start out with Bixby being kind of that voice UI, not necessarily doing as much, looking up content on the web sort of stuff, but more about, hey, Bixby, tell me how my phone can connect to my fridge and what can I actually do with that, and start to get better at pulling this stuff together. But a lot of what's also happening at this show is what I'll call some of the blocking and tackling stuff that nobody's wanted to do, because what we've seen over the last few years has been this product does this product does this product does this, and now all of a sudden people have gotten a couple of these things and they're like, yeah, but I want this to do something with this. And getting those cross connections is really, really hard.
Well, in fact, we were in the Samsung booth Tuesday morning, and they were obviously touting Bixby, but this whole connection, the number of partners, whether it's Samsung or Google, you look at all the Google controlled devices, you look. Actually, Apple's not HomeKit doesn't have much out here.
No, there is very little Apple presence.
Right. So we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we're going to pick up this conversation with Bob O'Donnell, talking about what we're seeing here at CES. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. You're listening to Killer Innovations on the Biz Talk Radio Network.
This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Welcome back to Killer Innovations. We're continuing our conversation with Bob O'Donnell here at the Consumer Electronics Show here in Las Vegas. So we were just wrapping up the whole conversation on autonomous vehicles and what you're referring to as the new OS wars.
Well, the voice stuff.
Voice stuff for the new the new OS war for voice. And as we were saying, I just took a peek outside the mobile studio here. The line to get into the Google booth is like unbelievably long. Yeah. Everybody wanting to check out what Google's got here. So what else are you seeing here at the show?
Well, there's a number. There's always weird and interesting gadgets and stuff. Sony reintroduced Aibo after almost 20 years, which is kind of crazy. And, the funny thing is, and this kind of hit me when I was there, Aibo is an AI robot, hence the name. Well, 20 years ago, nobody thought about that. And if you said that, no one wouldn't have made much sense. Nowadays, of course, it's like, oh, yeah, I get it. And of course, it's significantly better, better technology. It's just an interesting application of this. And, we are seeing AI being put into a lot of stuff. Now, a lot of this is ridiculous, right? It's just AI because if you don't say AI, then you're going to feel like...
Well, I feel like we're back to the .com days.
Yeah.
Where everybody just changed the name of their company and put a .com at the end. Everybody's taking their product and say, we have AI in it.
Right.
And it's actually one of the reasons why in my prediction video that I always do before CS, I talked about AI as being in an overhyped situation because people get confused of AI... machine learning, big data, it kind of all starts to get clumped all together.
It does. I mean, the thing that is interesting is with AI, we're starting to see radically different ways of thinking about products being put together, radically different components being used to drive some of this. And, bigger transformational changes like edge computing versus cloud-based stuff, which, that goes way beyond what we saw at CES. But all the pieces are there now. And so, because with AI, fundamentally AI is basically pattern recognition, recognizing something going on and then adjusting accordingly. And so there's a lot of interesting ways you can think about that and learning things like just simple commands to turn on your, we've all seen the basic Alexa turning on the light stuff, but we're starting to see some additional intelligence being embedded, a little bit of it here on the AI side where, right now, for example, with smart speakers, just briefly to go back to that, it's an awkward, ask a question, wait for the response. You can't have a two-way conversation. Right. Only way that's going to happen is by having more embedded computing locally so it doesn't have to go to the cloud and can do some stuff locally. And so there's been a few companies talking about some of those kinds of things, the ability to have a non-cloud connected thing, like of all people, GE Lighting. They're going to have a light switch with some of the embedded intelligence that doesn't have to go to the cloud. So that way, if you lose your cloud connectivity, you don't lose the ability to control your lights.
But it's actually interesting you talk about that because what I've seen happen is people have trained themselves. Yes. They train themselves on how do I need to talk so Siri understands me? It's back, if you remember graffiti in a palm.
Right,
you taught yourself how to write in graffiti language versus... Yep. Writing out full alphabets in order to get hand recognition. It is amazing how much we as humans will adapt ourselves to the technology.
Right. No, it's absolutely true. And yet, and then the question becomes, especially, again, I know we keep going on the speaker stuff, but each of those assistants, you have to talk to them differently, right?
Yep.
So you have to learn to talk.
Google's different than Siri,
Yeah,
different than Alexa.
Which becomes a big problem. Again, back to the comment I made earlier. But it's interesting because AI is being, and again, I agree with you, overhyped tremendously, but it's being talked about in all kinds of interesting applications, like Samsung The Wall. We were talking about that earlier. Amazing TV, this modular TV. We're still trying to figure out how big the modules are, but and then part of what they're also doing behind the scenes is for some of their video processing and upscaling for 4K and 8K, they're claiming that some of the video processing they're doing is actually using AI. Still not 100% clear to me exactly how they're leveraging AI.
Oh, they're claiming that it's detecting those thin edges, like
Yes.
the edges of buildings
Yes,
or
exactly.
edges of roads, and they de-blur them.
Yes,
and-
yeah. I
but
mean,
it's sort of, I think of it as more as video processing
I
than
agree.
AI.
I
but,
agree with you, but but again, that's how some people are talking about that. And then and also another thing on the car side is we're seeing a lot of voice integration into cars. By the way, so Alexa and Google Assistant being embedded into to cars. And then we've also got like I said, there's the crazy gadgets that people are seeing. I haven't seen it, but I saw a number of people writing up on Twitter. Some startup that has you can use radar to see through a wall. There's some kind of interesting way of leveraging technologies to see through a wall. So there's always those kind of crazy things. Ton of VR and AR. I got to try out the NVIDIA holodeck, which is their idea of a future interface, particularly for engineers to work together remotely, through a VR headset and manipulate models and stuff like that. I mean, it's still pretty crude, obviously, at this point, but it's an interesting step towards where we're starting to go.
Yeah, it's definitely. But this year, though, even though we're seeing lots of stuff,
Right.
it all seems to be somewhat incremental.
Yeah,
There hasn't been.
right.
There's no. At CES, it used to be you got the big surprise thing, something
Yeah.
really big that became
Right.
transformative. But it's okay. 4K to 8K
Yeah,
to 16K.
I know.
AI. We've been talking about AI. I love the fact cryptocurrencies like everywhere, right?
Yeah.
The fact that Kodak this week announces cryptocurrency and their share price goes through the roof. And I've been saying for a while that this thing's going to be a bubble.
Oh, for
and people are
sure.
going to get really hurt.
Yeah, they are.
When
there's
this bubble bursts.
There's no doubt about it.
and
Although
so-
I think I'm going to start offering research that you can purchase in cryptocurrency. I just decided I should probably do that.
Oh, you're gonna take cryptocurrency as a payment for
Yeah.
your research? Okay.
What the heck? Why not?
Well,
right?
I'm not going to be a client then.
It's not the only way.
But we're these kinds of shows. It gets into the question of the electronic show and NAB and these other shows about what's the role of what people announce at the shows.
Well, it's you bring up a great point, and arguably the last several years, CES has been this more incremental kind of a thing, and it's because, as I mentioned briefly earlier, we've got all kinds of great technologies, but we're not really using them well. We're not integrating. So now comes the much harder but much less sexy part of actually making all this stuff work together, right? There's standard issues that have to be addressed. There's actual, software integration that has to be addressed. There's dealing with, these APIs and getting them to standardize and so that people can write software that works across multiple things. That stuff is not sexy. It is not trade show worthy, yet that's fundamentally what really needs to happen before we can kind of make this next step to the dream visions that people have had for a while.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we're going to take a quick break. We're going to continue our conversation with Bob O'Donnell. When we come back from this first break, continue our conversations about CES 2018. We'll be right back.
This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Welcome back to Innovations. We're continuing our conversation with Bob O'Donnell. Now, Bob, we teed up the start of the show, the fact that you and I have known each other for
a long time.
Unbelievably long time. So, you want to tell the story?
Yeah,
or do you want me to tell the story?
We can both tell it. So, years ago, Phil and I were at an HP event. It was an outdoor dinner, and it was a little chilly, and they had some heat lamps. And Phil's like, "Oh, it's fine. Don't worry about it. You know, I grew up in Chicago. You know, I can sit away from the heat lamp." I'm like, "Oh, really? Where? I grew up in Chicago too." He's like 185th and Halsted, and I literally, my jaw dropped to the floor because I'm like, I grew up at 187th and Halsted. So we started talking, and we realized we went to grade school, junior high, high school together in Glenwood, Illinois, and
we were in band together.
We were in band together
in
All right,
junior
now you
high.
can tell this part of the story. Go ahead.
I was first chair baritone. Bob was second chair trombone. Sat behind me.
Yeah, truth be told, however, I would go back and forth with a couple of my buddies.
You are never going to relinquish that.
Hell no, man. But speaking of which, our Glenwood boys, Caruso, Hackle, Di Giovanni, Lager, Caniglio, they're all tuning in. All those guys, who know Phil as well, old buddies of ours who...
The old gang. The old gang from the neighborhood.
Anyway, but...
So it was this freaky moment because Bob was 1 year behind me.
Yep.
And we're sitting at this table at the HP event, and we're having this conversation. And we're like going at it for 10 minutes, and then we look up. Nobody else is talking. Everybody is... all eyes are on us because they're all like freaking out. Because at this time, Bob was one of the leading analysts in the Valley predicting
PC shipment stuff.
So Bob's models could either make or break share price. And all of a sudden, all the HP senior execs realized that I've got this like long personal relationship with this guy.
That's funny.
But it was like 4 tables. Everybody stopped, and everybody's just looking at us.
I had almost forgotten about that part of it.
And so ever since then, Bob and I've stayed connected, and I get my updates from from the gang, back in town. But now you've actually got your own firm. You left and started your own firm and doing your own research. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. I've been an industry analyst for 19 years, almost 15 years at IDC, where I ran, PCs, displays, smartphones, tablets, wearables, all that kind of stuff. And a little over 4 years, I'm into my 5th year now. I started technalysis research, and I continue to do independent research. I've expanded my reach. I'm doing autonomous cars, smart home, just did edge computing, doing some VR and AR. I write a lot I write for USA Today and Recode and TechSpot and do a bunch of TV stuff.
You still write for TechPinions, too.
Yeah, and TechPinions, of course.
Right.
Yeah, the TechPinions stuff actually gets republished a bunch of places. Seeking Alpha as well. Mm-hmm. I do a podcast with the TechPinions folks, with Tim, who I know you had on.
Yep.
I do a bunch of stuff with Bloomberg TV and CNBC. So
you're a busy guy.
I'm having a good time. I'm having a good time.
Glenwood
boys pulling through here.
So let's pop back into the CES. Is there anything been a surprise here? Has it been something that you go like, okay, a weak signal, something that's kind of indicating that there's going to be?
No, I don't think there has been. It's a lot. What is happening is the reach of electronics is getting broader and broader and broader, which is allowing the show to get bigger and bigger and bigger. I mean, automotive used to be really just the car stereo guys. I mean, that was what the North Hall of CES primarily used to be. Now it's the actual automobile makers with all the tech that they're doing. And you've got all kinds of things in smart home, in digital health. That's a huge area, right? So
but I mean, look, CES, it used to be over at the Sands.
Yeah.
They did that sub-conference inside CES called the Gray Wave.
Yeah.
And talk about, home health, aging in place, those kinds of things. But I think the maturity now is finally getting to a position where it's interesting, I think, at least. But still, it's not like there's something...
No, there really isn't. I mean, for me, the trade show value is I get to see a whole lot of people in one place, right?
Right.
At the end of the day, doesn't matter what industry you're in. You go to a trade show because you can see a lot of people in a short amount of time,
Right.
and there's just business gets done and things happen. And the products are almost kind of secondary in an interesting way.
Well, it's a little bit of eye candy, I think.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of eye candy.
Yeah, but and speaking of eye candy, I mean, we talked a little bit about the wall, but there's also some amazing TVs, and that traditional AV stuff is still a big deal. Sony also has this near to the wall projector thing that's really cool. It's like $25,000, but
they've been showing that for the last 2 years.
Yeah, well, they have a new one now that actually they use this new, it's got embedded speakers, same technology. They have a glass speaker that actually radiates glass to make sound. They have a TV where the sound actually comes from the screen. They're actually using actuators behind the screen to vibrate and actually generate audio.
Wow. Okay.
So, which is kind of cool. And look, even the good old PC guys are doing some interesting stuff.
Always connected, Qualcomm, Snapdragon-based laptops.
That.
Seeing a lot of those.
You see a lot of that stuff. Dell, the XPS13, beautiful machine. They continue to refine it. Interesting. Now they have the, and who would have thought, dogs and cats sleeping together, Intel and AMD on a single part, where AMD did a custom Radeon graphics core just for Intel, and now they have this combined part, and they're able to do incredibly...
Taking the best of both companies.
Exactly. Taking the best of both, putting it in a single part, and they're putting it in these very slim, like 13 millimeter notebooks. Even there, we're seeing that. Lenovo has been doing a lot of interesting stuff. They're really getting into other VR stuff. They've got the first standalone Google Daydream headset that's powered by a Qualcomm Snapdragon. And, obviously no wires because it's standalone. But, all of the VR stuff, the problem is it's still this big, bulky thing, right? And most people don't like to wear that for very long. It just, it just gets old. But, it's again, we're back to the original point. We are seeing CES expand so that we've got all of these different parts of it. Even some people talking about smart city applications and sort of more enterprise-focused stuff is starting to trickle in because there's this recognition that the devices I own, the cars I own, the devices I own are going to start connecting to some of that stuff.
Right.
Again, not all of this is particularly sexy, but it's a critical part of how we move to that really futuristic vision that people we've seen and talked about, but it's kind of one of those things like I can see where it is, but it turns out the stretch between where we actually are now and where that is a lot further than. Well,
it's interesting because it's human nature. Look, you and I've been, our careers have been built on predicting the futures, right? Which, at least what I have found is humans, when we look at these kind of predictive futures, is we way overestimate how fast something's going to happen in the first 5 to 7 years, and then we way underestimate
the size of the impact.
The size of the impact, right? Yeah. Nobody ever believed that Moore's law would be able to go on, right? So as soon as you start seeing the doubling, and you get to that second or third doubling, you're like, okay, well, I can't go on beyond that because that's just I can't imagine it,
right?
And it's kept the march going, right?
Yep.
Since the 70s. And so I think in many cases, like at the Consumer Electronics Show, you can see what's next, and you're thinking, okay, it's only going to be 6 months.
Right.
When it's actually going to be 3 more years.
Right.
Before it actually becomes a reality.
Right.
But then you've got to be careful that you don't fool yourself into thinking that, this will just be this kind of slow, forever flat, and all of a sudden becomes the new hockey stick. Right? I remember drones 5 years ago to drones, the holiday season, it was the thing. Everybody had to buy a drone.
Right. But even with drones, right, some of the things, it is interesting because I remember CESs from like 2 or 3 years ago where there were crowds and crowds around the drones. Now it's kind of like, whatever.
I've seen it. No big deal. Why, is it really going to turn into much of anything they got to worry about? Yeah, well, the other thing is like, was it last year or 2 years ago, those wave boards or whatever they were called, the scooter ones, the scooter board. The ones that caught on fire. The ones that caught on fire. But that was like a huge deal for like 1 year. Then people are like, okay, what's the next thing in that area? And
the interesting point is I'm not sure there was one this year. I don't
No,
really feel like there was.
Yeah, there hasn't. That's the thing that you always kind of look for, and you look for it in the edges.
Yes, of course.
You're trying to find the little guy that's getting
Right.
no press attention,
Right.
and no love, and can you find something that's kind of a little bit different,
Right,
and there might be somebody. Plus, the show is so darn big.
Well, it is
hard.
It's
to.
impossible to see more than a
can't.
tiny fraction of it.
Yeah.
Really
So we're going
is.
to take another quick commercial break. When we come back, I'm going to ask Tim or Bob to talk about really what he sees for 2018 and 2019, given his research work. So when we come back, we'll pick up this conversation with Bob O'Donnell.
This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Welcome back. At the break of the last segment, I asked Bob for you to think about, part of your work and part of your research is really to take a look at these predictions.
Right.
So if you kind of take a look at, not tied to CES, but just to the prediction work you do for 2018, 2019, what are your predictions? What's your big thing that's on your radar screen?
So, a couple of different things, and I just did a predictions document you can find on Tech Pinions and TechSpot and Seeking Alpha and LinkedIn, and maybe Recode will republish it as well. But first one I talked about is actually about AI, and my point was we're going to start to see AI drive what I call empathetic computing, and what I mean by that is simply that we have incredible technology and compute capability, but at the end of the day, our devices still, here we are in 2018, they're not smart. They're really just not smart. They have no sense of context.
Yep.
And I think what we're going to start to see in 2018 is AI being applied to actually start to give some contextual intelligence to devices. It's going to be slow, it's going to be subtle, it's going to take a while, but I think by the end of this year, we're going to be able to look back and go, yeah, here's some interesting things where we're starting to have a more, interesting, almost human-like conversation, or at least set of expectations being different, such that, these things, instead of just being, intelligent, are smart, because there's a big difference between the two. So that's number one. I think in general, on the compute side, one of my predictions was that 2018 is the year of the accelerator. So, we've heard a lot about CPUs and GPUs. Now what we're seeing a lot of these component guys do is create, neural network accelerators. And, they're using FPGAs and all these other interesting chip technologies that most people don't understand, but they're doing things in a more efficient way and in an extremely power-sensitive way, which is allowing you to put more intelligence on, what's called the edge. Speaking of which, another big trend is around the growth of edge computing. Up till now, we've been thinking about the fact that, everything connects to the cloud.
Right.
And while that model works, it's in some ways, it's not terribly different than the old mainframe model, right? And so then as we went from mainframe to client server, where we said, wait, let's put some intelligence in the PC and do a little bit of that. Then we kind of went to the cloud, which was kind of like back to the mainframe. And now edge computing is kind of like the next iteration back to PC client.
Yep.
So anyway, that I think is also a big picture trend. And I'm trying to remember other ones. But those are some of the big... Oh, and then the voice computing thing. I kind of teased this one earlier, but one of the ones I also said was, look, there's going to be a real problem when people start to get a whole bunch of voice assistants. And it's not that they will, because if you pick an Alexa, you're probably just going to buy Echoes if you choose Alexa. But you might buy something else that has Google Assistant in it. And you're going to be able to start changing the watchword to something that you want rather than just keep saying Alexa or Hey Google. Eventually you could have them all set, just respond to computer, like if you want to be like Hal,
Mm-hmm.
And say, computer, do this. And, all of a sudden they could all start doing stuff. And I've even heard stories of Google Google Homes responding to Alexas.
Yeah, they get them talking to each other.
Yeah, which is, that's a kind of a hint of interesting and yet potentially problematic.
Well,
as well.
or you get the TV advertisements that that issue the Google command and ends up ordering something,
Right.
or Alexa
Well, yeah.
command that automatically orders stuff from your Amazon account, and all of a sudden, 300 dollhouses show up or
Right.
whatever.
Right, exactly.
You know.
And then, another big thing is, in general, this motion, and this isn't a new one. Again, it's hard to find things that are going to be completely new this year versus what we've seen. But there are things that become mainstream in a given year, right?
Right.
And I think, obviously, in your side of the world around content, there's a lot of interesting streaming services.
Yep.
And the whole model around not just media services, but all kinds of other services. And then I think what we'll again start to see is more integration of these kinds of services. Because one of the problems you've got is, I can't have everything in the world as a service, right? And so it's great. Again, this is a classic case of this industry. This company says, well, we're going to do ours as a service. We're going to do ours. But for an actual human being, they'll be like, well, I actually do all 15 of these things. I'm not going to pay for and have 15 different accounts and all that kind of stuff. So I think we'll start to see that people figuring out, and it's more of a business, it's not a tech problem. This is a business model problem. How do we get the business models of these couple of different unique services combined in interesting and new ways? And I think that's a business opportunity. I think new companies will come up to build around some of the existing stuff that's out there.
Yeah, but there's a fundamental challenge, though, and that assumes cooperation.
Yes, well, of course.
Right?
Absolutely.
And in these battles, like voice, nobody's given up an inch of turf in these battles.
Well, and that's true. And because there have been discussions of something like what I would call, to counteract what I mentioned, the meta assistant. And you actually talk to it, and then it in turn determines which assistant to send each inquiry to.
So you have an assistant of an assistant.
Yeah.
Kind of like, talk to my people, we'll schedule a meeting, or we'll have the
Sort of.
pre-meeting for the pre-meeting for the meeting.
Right,
type of
exactly.
thing. So, hey, Bob, if people want to track what you're doing, what's the best place for them to find you?
You can go to the website. It's www.technalysisresearch. So think of analysis, but just put in TECH, not tech analysis, but technalysisresearch.com.
I'm guessing a bunch of people have misspelled the
Yes, they
URL,
have.
so therefore
That's why I have to clarify.
You got to always have to clarify, right? So with that, we're going to wrap up today's show. All the links and everything we've talked about, we will have up in the show notes. So hop on over to killerinnovations.com, and you'll find all the information there. Thanks for taking the time to join the show this week. Really appreciate it. If you got suggestions for upcoming guests or upcoming topics, drop me a note, phil@killerinnovations.com. My advice, as it is always every week, don't let the innovation antibodies get you down. Don't let the critics dissuade you from taking that great idea you've got, turn it into a real innovation, into a real product, a real service, and go out there and change the world. Find us you can hear us now over on Spotify, iHeart, iTunes, Google Play, every place you want to listen to us, take us with you in your pocket, and let us know. Give us some feedback. Appreciate it. Have a great week. We'll talk to you real soon. Bye-bye.